Hey everyone, welcome back to another Cultivated Culture success story. I've got Joseph Bradley with me here, and I honestly couldn't be more excited because this man has one of the coolest stories I've ever heard. Starting from, microbiology back in undergrad, going into finance from there, then ending up in blockchain, working full time, and now finally starting his own blockchain company. So, Joseph, thanks so much for joining me tonight, man.
Man, I really appreciate it, Austin. It's great to be here with you.
Yeah, and it's great to have you. So tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now, and then we can dive all the way back to the very beginning and talk a little bit more about those undergrad days and how this all got started. But you just started your own company. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been working in the blockchain space for about 4 years now, and have had the privilege of working with some incredibly smart people along the way, and kind of always being the guy willing to raise my hand and ask the stupid questions. And so and to those stupid questions, I typically got really really good answers. So it kind of got me thinking, got the wheels turning, and ended up starting a company, I guess, in January of this year called Omni Alternatives. And so what Omni Alternatives does is we take highly programmable token structures, and we create programmable securities. You can do many cool things with programmable securities, but we're starting with breaking liquidity out of illiquid alternative assets. So that paints with a pretty broad brush, but we can get into details about that a little bit later.
Awesome. Sounds good. And I love this because we're talking about the cutting edge of technology, right? With blockchain, something that not a lot of people understand. It's right on the forefront. But if we rewind to the beginnings, I would say that your background is kind of the opposite of that, right? So you grew up, I believe, was it Eastern Tennessee?
It was a place called Granger County, Tennessee. Not a movie theater in the entire county.
How many stoplights?
So people talk about one stoplight towns. We actually had two. So one in,
Nice. All right.
one in Blaine and one in Rutledge, but we had
Awesome.
two.
Awesome. Two stoplights, one movie theater.
Yeah.
For undergrad, you ended up going to the University of Tennessee, and you're studying microbiology and what else?
Yeah, so I started out as micro is my major, political science is my minor, and actually ended up kind of flipping that at the very very end so that I could get the last little bit out of my scholarship and graduate on time. But yeah, I love the maths, I love science, and love to read. So it's a good mix.
Awesome. And so you're going through undergrad, you're studying those couple of things, and graduation's on the horizon, right? You got to start thinking about the real world. In
Uh-huh.
that moment, what were your plans? Like, what was the grand scheme? After graduation, what were you going to go on to do?
Yeah, so the truth is, I really didn't know. When I was in undergrad, I had played with a couple of entrepreneurial ideas. I actually filed for a patent and was given a patent and worked that for a little bit, trying to sell my patent, trying to understand that. Ended up finishing, as I mentioned, with my major being political science, and there aren't a lot of things that you really go and do with that afterwards. So
Hmm.
you could go to law school, you can do a couple of other things. And so I sat for the LSAT in my senior year, was trying to like really think through what I wanted to do, and actually ended up graduating in 2007. Pretty tough economy. And so really started looking around and was, kind of bartending and waiting and, working a variety of odd jobs, and just looked around and I was like, I'm a young person and the world is vast. And so why don't I just kind of cast my lot and see where it goes. So started looking at a map, looked at Miami, New York, or Los Angeles, and said I'm gonna pick one. I'm gonna get there, and I'm gonna see what I can do. So I ended up in LA. Didn't know anybody, but I packed the car up, and I did have a job lead, but I had to be there to interview.
Okay.
So
Job lead, though, not a solid concrete thing.
no, it was, as a matter of fact, it was probably less concrete than I pitched my folks at the time. But yeah, if it didn't fit my car, I sold it and I moved to Long Beach, California, and interviewed for the gig. Yep,
Awesome.
yep.
Did you end up getting it?
I did, and funny enough, my general manager was actually from my hometown
Nice.
in Knoxville, and so once I worked my way up a couple of levels of the interview, they were like, "All right, final interview, you ready?" I'm like, "Sure, I'm ready." And they say, "Okay, get on a plane and fly to Knoxville." But yeah, it's funny how those things work out. But I did get the position. Yep.
Awesome. And what was the industry? What were you doing? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think I just want to mention this real quickly before I dive into this. You've got to be your path is often odd and twisty and turny, but you got to be proud of everything that you did, And so I say this because I've had a bunch of odd jobs throughout my life, but this gig, I literally said, if someone will hire me and pay me money, I will work there. This was in 2000, I guess early 2008.
Hmm.
And so took a job with a company by the name of QPR that was owned by a big building materials company, Lafarge Wholesome now, but and was working with oil in the oil industry. So oil like that goes on bridge decks and you build roads with and things like that. And went to work for these guys basically as an oil sales guy, going out to job sites and getting folks to buy the oil and eventually kind of working my way up into sourcing and all that. But those were interesting times because in 2008 middle managers had been let go,
Yep.
and so I was the new kid. And they said, "Hey, look, you can work here, and you can keep your position, and we'll pay you the same, or we can give you more responsibility. Which, by the way, we're going to pay you the same, but if you mess it up, we might let you go." So I said, I mean, it sounds like an opportunity, right? So flew me back east, wrote a business plan, which I didn't know what a business plan was. They said, "Write us a business plan," and I Googled, "What is a business plan?" And then I said, "When do you need it?" And they said 48 hours. So I got to work. Yep.
I was gonna say, I think I remember you saying it was like a 48-hour turnaround. So I'm glad
Yeah.
you mentioned it. That's great. Like from Google to final product in 2 days is
That's right.
crazy.
That's right.
And so what happened next? You took on more responsibility. You wrote the business plan. I believe they gave you the opportunity and things went
Hmm.
pretty well. How'd it go from there?
Yeah, so things went well, and it's they say that opportunity is kind of hard work and preparedness at meeting at the same time, and I think I had the hard work box checked, but I don't know about the preparedness box because I didn't even know the questions to ask really, so put this thing together, got sign off, and ended up just kind of executing and really reaching out to as many people that I felt had just like traveled the path as I possibly could, because I was frankly in a little over my head, which I was very clear about, because I was 23, I guess, at the time, and I just really started thinking like, man, I need people to ask questions to, and so. I reached out to just anybody that I could think of that was in my phone, or so and so had a brother or a cousin or whatever, and I just set up little informational interviews to just ask them kind of how they looked at business and looked at the world. And so did a lot of that in the first couple of years as I navigated. Of course, had some mentors inside the business as well, and ended up building a fairly sizable territory on the West Coast. Was managing about 11 states and had a couple of employees. And then I was like, the entrepreneurial bug hit, and I said, I seem to have done well. This can't be it. I want to reach for a little something bigger, and so I ended up starting my own company at about 25. So
Awesome, awesome. And I love that you also mentioned the twists and turns and well, one accepting them, but also really like looking back on them fondly. I'd ask you, how many of those things that you thought were kind of failures or waste of time, how many of those came back to help you in the future?
absolutely every single one of them,
Hmm.
without a doubt, because the truth is, it's like this is your story, man, and you get so into the moment, as you should, and it seems like these things seem like the end of the world, right? It's like I don't know how I'm going to put one foot in front of the other. However, that is the most important thing, is momentum, because you can always steer. Starting and stopping is the hard part. That's what will wear you out and exhaust you, but you can always steer. And somebody told me that years ago, and I just remember thinking like, okay, even if I'm not going to make the perfect right decision, just make a decision. Make a decision, drive forward, and keep your ears open and ask and steer. And so there was a lot of that, Austin, a lot of that with the decisions that needed to be made, even to grow the business, where it was like, did I make the right decision? And the reality of it is, and moving out and making those big life-changing decisions to head out west, and you don't know how it's going to end up, but man, I mean, it's a fun ride if you'll let it be.
Definitely. Yeah, you either win or you learn, and if you learn, you win. So
That's
it's
exactly
like
right.
a win-win, right? But I think that's one of the toughest things that, especially I've noticed talking to some of the people who might be watching the video, where they don't know what they want to do, and they're so afraid of making the wrong move, especially if they've gotten burnt in the past, right? Like you sink 4 years and potentially a couple $100,000 of student debt into a degree, and then you find out you don't like it, right? So maybe you start with microbiology, and you're like, it's not for me. But you spend so much time doing this, so you don't want that next move to be the exact same thing. But like you said, I mean, all these twists and turns, they add up. You get experience from each and every one of them, and I can't tell you how many things that I thought were a waste of time when I did them in the moment that came back and helped me 5-10 years later, that they were invaluable. So yeah, for everybody listening, I'm really glad that you brought that up. So you have this territory, you decide to start your own company. What did you get into? What was that company? What did it look like?
Yeah, so well, let me make one quick comment
Sure.
on something that you said, which I think is really, really interesting. So if you take a step back and you say, I studied microbiology, but really do I want to go and spend all this time in a lab, or whatever the conclusion is that you come to. If you zoom out and you think about really what transferable skill you were able to achieve by doing that. Studying is the one thing that there is no sacrifice for. It's just you didn't know micro, and then you knew micro, right? And you knew it through this process of studying. And so I really think that the most valuable skill that can always be transferred is just taking the time to really let your mind do what it's built to do. When you don't understand something, it's painful at first, and if you keep at it, the human brain, it adapts, and all of a sudden you start seeing the things that seemed like Greek or like P-Chem or whatever, and now make sense. But so the business, so this was a hard right. So I had a big territory. I traveled a lot for my company, and I was living in Long Beach, and I randomly was home for the Long Beach Grand Prix, which is a big car race in Southern California. And I saw a bike taxi or a pedicab, and I started thinking about this, and I was like, man, I've never seen one of these. And so I went up and talked to the driver, and he was like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of us out here, and we put advertisements, on the back of these things, and we were out here at all these races. And I started thinking about it, and I'm like, I think I have a buddy in Charleston that does this. So I called my friend Dana, and we talked a little bit about this, and I'm like, I felt like I had just kind of reached my peak at QPR, and there wasn't really a path forward, and I was just like getting this inkling that I needed to get back in the weight room, if you will, and just get stronger in a direction that I wasn't strong in. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to start a service-based business, and we're going to call it experiential advertising, or excuse me, experiential marketing, which was and was a kind of an emerging term then, a really hot term now. And so I raised a little bit of money from friends and family type situation, folks that were actually already in that industry that I didn't realize that I'd known, that were my buddies from my college days. And ended up starting a company that was an experiential advertising company using pedicabs to kind of interact with crowds in Long Beach. So
awesome, which is totally the same thing you were doing at QPR for sure. Like seamless transition.
Right.
That's awesome. It's how did that go? What came of it?
Yeah, horribly. It was funny because I was working for a big company, and I had all this horsepower, right? Because I was like this young guy and I just happened to make the right decision and it just worked out, right? And so, I've got an expense account and I've got my company car, and then all of a sudden I don't have any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I really struggled with this idea of like finding my professional voice, because now I didn't have that backing and I didn't have that network and that infrastructure. It hadn't occurred to me how much I leaned on that infrastructure, right? And so I said, you know what? I've made this decision. I had a business partner. And so I said, okay, I am just going to nose to the grindstone. I'm going to understand this industry as well as I can, marketing like that, experiential marketing, and I'm going to see what I can do. And so for about a year and a half, we really struggled with kind of putting the pieces together on this. And the thing about entrepreneurship is that your highs are higher and your lows are lower,
Mm-hmm.
right? But if you can just wrap your mind around the process, then some really interesting things can happen. And so running that business, people talk about like near death moments in businesses. Well, I'd never really experienced that because I was working for a big company, and like my near death moments were like, slight misses on my P&L or whatever.
Yep.
It wasn't like not being able to pay the people that worked for me. Totally different story. And so I remember that towards the end of that business, which by the way, there's a happy story at the end here. But I landed in LA. I'd been back here for a holiday, back east. I'm actually out east right now, and my phone rings, and it's my partner saying, "I just bounced a $350 check," and I'm like, "How did this happen? I left, and there were thousands of dollars in the bank. How did this happen?" And so we unwound a lot of it and realized that there were some less than smart decisions being made by the partner, and so we kind of ended up having to work around that. And long story short, this crazy situation came. We couldn't make a lot of the payments that we needed to make. We kind of took all this ecosystem of things that we were doing, we shrunk it to only what we could control, and built a plan out from there. We were able to pay all of our bills, able to kind of get out of that nosedive, and ended up going and creating contracts with the Anaheim Convention Center, with Angel Stadium, with Fox Sports Properties up at the Coliseum, kind of shifting the business model a little bit to concentrate on discrete events, and ended up kind of pulling it out of a nosedive. Meanwhile, the company that I left, because I was very intent on leaving this business under really good terms. My bosses had been really good to me at QPR, and I was very open and honest with them, at the right time, obviously, and by the timing is everything.
Mm-hmm.
But once I had kind of made my plans and I had decided that that's what I wanted to do, I said that, I'm a young person. I feel like that I've got to go pursue this, and they gave their blessing. So fast forward 2 years, I got the most flattering call that you could ever get, which was a call from the boss that I had walked away from, and he said, "Look, man, you've been building your own thing. Would you be interested in coming and building something for us internally?" And so after about 2 years of running this bike taxi group, Peddler Society was the name of the company, I got a call from Don, and he asked me to come back and build something for him.
Awesome. So you get the expense account back, you get the company car back, but you can still come up with an idea. Did they ask you to come up with an idea, or did they have the idea and they wanted you to kind of execute on it?
Yeah, so they had the idea, and what they were looking for me to do was kind of map a really specific sales process that we had used at QPR over to this new division. And so it ended up being a little bit more complicated. Like during that time, the company had been acquired by another company,
Mm-hmm.
and the other company had more of an interest in this pretty novel business model, and so. Ended up being hired by those guys back to build this division, and kind of set to work doing that, this time with some resources. So at that time, we were still running the experiential marketing group, but we had managers that were kind of running the day to day, and then I would make myself as was appropriate in my mind, available on nights and weekends to or getting up super early or going to bed super late to make sure that we delivered for the experiential clients. But then also, more importantly, if somebody's paying you a paycheck, there's an expectation of delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to make sure that I was doing right by that group as well.
Awesome. And did you end up sort of transitioning out of Peddler Society and going into this full time, or did you how long did you do both
Yeah.
concurrently?
Yeah, so I owned some equity in the business and kind of turned it over to. It was kind of interesting. Had a younger person who was really interested in kind of understanding that startup-y kind of space, and got pretty close with them and said, hey, look, if you want to kind of take the reins here and run this and use me as kind of a sounding board, I'm more than happy to kind of help you, because you were where I was 5 years ago. So let's talk this out and think this through. And so I had a couple of folks like that. They ran that for a while, ended up selling the business so I ran it from 2011 to 2013, and then sold the business in fall of 2014, fall of 2014. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So to go on a quick tangent real quick, because I think two things that I always tell people to do who come through my community, or the number one thing I'd say is to start reaching out to people, and doing informational interviews, making connections that way. And there's a lot of objection at first when people aren't used to doing that. So I'd love to have you just talk through quickly how you approach because it sounds like you've done this multiple times now at this point. I know we're going to get into blockchain shortly, and I know your story of how you got the gem, and I'm excited for you to tell it. But how do you go about reaching out to somebody that you've never met before and building that relationship? Can you just kind of walk me through your mindset and like preferred mediums, tools, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I think that people appreciate the truth, and people appreciate you doing legwork before you reach out to them. So if you are looking for someone because you have to think about it this way, right? Like, and by the way, my journey is far from over. I mean, you say you do this regularly. I was doing this today, literally today.
I was too. So I mean, trust me, we're in the same boat.
Yeah, it never ends.
Yep.
It never ends,
Yep.
and it never will end.
And that's the thing. Once you get started, right? It's like crack. Like you do it once, and then you get the first reply, and you're like, "Oh, this works." And then you're like, "Fuck, well, the world's my oyster." And then you just start firing them off. But sorry, keep going.
And when someone answers you, you have to remember, if somebody else reaches out to you, you have to return the favor.
Yep.
Like that is the way that this works. Now, of course, you can screen and say, hey, like, what can I help you with before we hop on the phone? But the point that I was going to make to begin with is you reach out to somebody and you cold call them. And I got to say, like, that is the biggest. I was talking about transferable skill sets, right? Studying is one. Another one is just going through the process of connecting with complete strangers. Like we are all, I mean, this sounds total kumbaya, but we are all in this kind of big thing together, and everybody's got complexities in their life, and everybody has good days and bad days, and everybody's like, life doesn't change. You kind of just elevate, like your exact mindset now. If you have $100 million in the bank, you're still you. You take you with you, like always, right? And so your circumstances may change, but you are a closed circuit, and you can be upgraded, and you can get better at whatever you're doing. And so a lot of trial and error, telling the truth at all costs, including your life. Never, ever, ever. And if you don't know, say you don't know. And so my point is that as you craft a narrative around how to reach out to complete strangers, and you say, look, I read about you in this book, or I read about you in this article, or I took a class with somebody who was connected with you on LinkedIn, or I saw a YouTube video that you were on, or I saw, and you don't need to write a novel, but you need to just say something that is truthful and be honest and level set, show that you've done work prior to even reaching out to them. It's not that like, I'm making a hard, and by the way, this is not to say you can't do this, but it's just, showing that you've done some work. Hey, I'm in experiential advertising and I'm into cryptocurrency now, let me in. It's like, it just doesn't work that way. And so, showing that you've gone through the mechanics of really thinking deeply about why you're reaching out to this person, making that clear to them. And the truth is, as human beings, we love to help each other,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like but you've got to make it very clear why you're there, what you're asking for, and and help to kind of guide that outcome. Because when you ask for minutes of somebody's life, that is a big ask. That is a big ask. And so you just have to be, in my mind, first very thoughtful about how you reach out to people, polite, and get ready, because by the way, everyone's knee-jerk reaction is no. Everyone's knee-jerk
Yep.
reaction is no. And it's not, when I say overcome it, it's not like convincing someone of why they need to be on the phone with you, but it's simply just, and it's not such that it's not a canned response. It's an organic outreach of one person who has done a ton of research and is asking you to is asking someone else to kind of enrich their exploration of this space. I think most people will eventually get back with you. And by the way, for me personally, not that this happens a lot, but if somebody wants to reach out to me and they do it 1,000 times, sometimes you're just busy. Sometimes you miss it. Sometimes that happens all the time. And so just being politely persistent, you can do that. You can absolutely do that. It's something that you can get better at. If you mess it up with somebody, with one person, just kind of hone it and get your kind of lead up a little bit tighter the next time, and it will work. 100% it will work.
Awesome. I love it. Because that's, I mean, I couldn't have put it better myself. And one of the things that I like to do, and one of the biggest mistakes I see people make, is that they make the outreach about them. So especially people watching this are most likely looking for a job. And so if I reach out and I say, I was just talking to somebody today about this, and I say, hey, like, help me get a job, or like, help me meet this person, or help pass my resume along. Like, it's very much about me. But if you show up and, like you said, you do the legwork before, you do some research on the person, the company, the product that they work on, et cetera, and you say, hey, I'm really interested in what you're doing, what your team's doing, your background, and I did a bunch of research. I know that you guys are having an issue with this. Here's a couple of ideas that I had. Do you mind chatting about them on the phone? Mm-hmm. That is going to be way more effective, right, than just being like, hey, Joseph, I have a resume and you have a job opening, so, like, gimme.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
so
right.
If you're able to provide that value, again, do the legwork, like you said. And then I love the polite follow up. My rule of thumb was like once every 5 business days or so. And then I used an email tracker too. I don't know if you're into those, but just to see when people.
I'm a sales guy. Absolutely.
Nice. Some people are like, I don't know, I haven't tried it. But you're right on. Of course, I should have known. Awesome. So I appreciate it. So you're back. You are working on sort of this entrepreneurial idea within the company, and you kind of built that out. But then eventually you decided that it's time for something new, right? It's time for another one of these chapters. And I think your next move was to move into blockchain, right?
It was. Yeah,
awesome.
It was absolutely. So just a quick little bit of context. When I was running the experiential group, I was working with some folks that were like fixed gear bike riders. Those were a lot of the folks that we hired, and someone was randomly telling me about this thing called Bitcoin. This was like 2012, and I was like, man, this is really interesting. And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, I remember she was recalling this the other day. I was like, have you heard of this? And she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about at all. And so I had some developer buddies that were up in Seattle at the time, and I called them and I'm like, okay, so it's like this. It's a distributed ledger, and there's like something going on where like people have wallets. It's like digital cash. I'm like, have you heard of this? And they're like, no, but we'll get back to you. So anyway, 2012, these guys bought Bitcoin. I didn't. Just to be clear, I did not. I was too busy, running my company and then figuring that out. But so 2014 hits, and this was after the Mt. Gox crash in 2013. And I am putting 2 and 2 together because Mt. Gox made the headlines, and I was like, dude, that is the same stuff that these guys were talking about. And so at the time, I was still working for QPR. Let's see. So that would have been the springtime of 2014. Was still working for QPR. Was in the process of selling Peddler Society. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, what's next, man? Like, really, what is next? Like, to continue to mature and grow, like, we have to continue to just like push our limits. And we human beings are capable of really amazing things if you can just get the discipline thing down, right? That's the tough one.
Hmm.
And so I started thinking about my biggest weak spot, and I thought, I love math, um, but I've never taken a finance class. And so I'm like, how am I going to, how am I, and actually, that's not true. It's not that I hadn't taken a finance class, it's that I had never studied finance. And so I started thinking about what's next for me, and I thought, okay, maybe I'm a good sales guy. I can build teams, I can run teams, so maybe I'll go sell expensive things. And so where do expensive things live? Well, they seem to live in finance. So maybe we'll do that. And also, this was a huge blind spot for me in my business, in my little business. I was like always asking questions. So I thought this is something I can learn. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go and study this. And so I started looking at programs, looked back east for graduate school. And like in my mid 20s, I was not ready for graduate school. I knew that, like, I wouldn't have known what to do with it. Like, it would have been a filler. I didn't have a real reason to do it. And I felt, in that moment when I went and started my own business, I thought, what's going to teach me more if I'm unsure? Is the wild going to teach me more, or is the high structure going to teach me more? Well, you need to have structure. You need context to apply that structure, right?
Yep.
And so I was kind of 20, I guess 28. And so I'm thinking, okay, this is the timing's right. It feels right. I know what I want to study. I know what I want to do with it, more importantly, because it's an expensive thing to do the whole grad school thing. And so what's my plan? And so at the same time, Mount Gox happened, and this was the end of 2013, beginning of 2014. And so I thought, man, this block. So way over here, I've got my job, and then way over here, I'm thinking, what am I doing next? And then all of a sudden, this blockchain thing drops in the middle of at the time, Bitcoin thing drops in the middle of the road there. And so I'm thinking, where can I learn about this? How can I learn about this, right? Because like the business school thing, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna take the highly technical route. I'm gonna study the most scientific thing I can in graduate school. But like, how do you learn about Bitcoin? And so at the time, there were, I say at the time like it's a long time ago. For some reason, things move so fast in technology, it's hard to keep up. But 2014, there was only Bitcoin. I mean, there were other tokens, coins, cryptocurrencies that were around, but Bitcoin far and away was the biggest, and the best example. And so, long story short, I looked it up and I was like, schools don't teach this. Like, you can't take anything at the community college with this. I'm like, everything on YouTube. I loved Andreas Antonopoulos. I watched everything that he had. I read
Hmm.
all of his books. I read Digital Gold. I read all these things. But I was just like, I get it, but I want to really learn about it. And then it hit me. I was like, how could I not only learn about this, but also start earning stripes? How could I do that? What could I do? And then I thought, okay, what can I give away that people will be interested in? And I thought, I'm a pretty good writer. So I got a couple of publications on the phone, and I said, let me send you some writing samples. You assign me things. I don't care how long the research project is. You tell me what you want me to write. I will do all the research. I will write it. And if I will give it to you, and if you like it, then you can pay me. And if you don't like it, then that's fine. Tell me what you don't like about it, and I'll fix it, and then you can pay me, right? And so I wanted to front end load. I didn't want to ask for anything in the beginning. And so I got a couple of groups to let me do that. And I started just incessantly researching. And I know myself well enough to know that I needed rigor. And so at the beginning of each week, I would be, I wouldn't wait for them. I would say, I need my assignment for the week, right? And so they'd give me a couple of assignments, and I'd pick them out, and I had deadlines, and I was working at QPR, and I was applying to business school, but I'm like, this is important, so you must make time. So what I did is I said, what can I cut out that I do not absolutely have to do, right? And so the first thing to go is like, well, what are you watching any TV for at all, period? right? And by the way, an hour is a 24th of your day. That's a substantial amount of time if you really break it down.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I started layering these things up, I said, if I spent an hour a day, just an hour a day, just researching this stuff and writing, and I time it, like each week have a new insight, and each month I'll have a new insight. And by the way, I was doing this 7 days a week because I really wanted to learn it. And so I started doing these articles, pushing these articles through. Got accepted to the University of Southern California, and started my study of finance there. And was writing for, ended up actually in my first year I stayed with QPR, but did got into Southern California. Decided that I did have limited bandwidth, sold Peddler Society so that I could concentrate on these things that I had in front of me, and continued to write for these magazines so that I could continue my study of blockchain.
Awesome. I'm gonna pause this for 1 second because my battery's about to die, and then I can edit this out. Were you writing for like CoinDesk and places like that?
Yes, I was writing for a hacked.com and cryptocurrency news.
Awesome.
There's a dude over there, Sambaraj Das, who was like my editor for a couple of years, I think, or
awesome.
a year, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and I love that strategy because that's so we've talked a lot about, I mean, I love that you brought up studying and learning as a transferable skill. That's actually one of the arguments that I made. So when I first interviewed at Google, I did the phone screen and they told me, they basically, like, the recruiter laughed me off the phone. And she told me I didn't have enough experience and all this other stuff. And I told her basically the same thing that you said. I said, my lack of experience is not due to, the opportunity to try and fail, but it's the lack of opportunity. And I'm a quick learner, blah, blah, blah. Here's what I've done to showcase that I'm a quick learner. And it actually got me bumped through to the next round. And I was further down the road, I got curious about the same thing. And there's this Coursera course, it's free, and it's called Learning How to Learn. And it's actually really fascinating. They talk to you about like your diffusive memory and then like your focus memory, and you can learn things when you're focused, but you need the diffusive time to kind of make the connections. And then they go through all this other stuff, but they say one of the best ways to actually learn something is to teach other people, explain it to other people. When you're writing, I mean, that's effectively what you're doing, right?
Absolutely.
So I love that because writing, everybody, I was a terrible writer. I got a D in my English course in college, and then my English professor would be laughing at me now. But we can all write for the most part. It's like a skill that you can learn. You just find other people who are good at it, and you kind of mimic them, right? You mimic their style, you read their stuff, and over time, it's like anything, right? Your first article is going to suck, and your 50th article is going to be better, and your 100th article is going to be better than that. And so that's something that anybody listening can do. If you want to get into a field, figuring out ways to write about it, start with your own blog, start on some place like medium.com, then try to get featured in some like low-level publications and work your way up. And not only are you going to learn about it, but people are going to start looking to you as the authority, right? And I'm sure this probably happened to you where, like, even if it was just in your circle of friends or like, small groups, you were known as like the blockchain guy, I would assume. Go ahead.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I mean, don't forget, I have mixed feelings on universities myself, but one thing that you cannot argue is that there are many people that think deeply about many esoteric topics hanging out at universities. So wherever you are, look and see where these people live and go to them, and ask them, whether it's blockchain or some weird place in computer science or statistics or whatever. Go talk to the people that are in the field and just say, look, I'm super interested in understanding this. I mean, when I meet someone for the first time that and they're working on something that's interesting, the one thing I always leave, first of all, I want to know everything about them. Second of all, I want to know what they read and how do they get new information, right? And I always request a reading list. What kind of books could I read to help me kind of understand how you've been able to formulate your opinions? Because it's like, I mean, we live in a world where information is we are very fortunate living in the place we live. Information is almost free, right? And so there is really no reason why that you can't, read as much as you possibly can as yeah, and by the way, the confluence of reading things and then, as you said, also trying to regurgitate it and make sense of it, it's challenging. But man, if you whatever your new topic is, if you can get good at that, then you can really start to wrap your mind around any topic, really.
100%.
Yep.
So awesome. You're writing. You're getting into this new space. And then at some point you start applying for companies, right? So how did that go? What happened?
Yeah, so I entered into USC in 2014. I had a pretty good number of articles under my belt, and I said my goal was to write 75. I said I want to write 75 articles. Like, even though I had 30, and then I had 40, and then I had 50, I was like 75 just seems like I've really taken it seriously, and like and I still hadn't figured out a good kind of plug for, like, I was thinking about, oh, well, this is a pain. I don't want to do this anymore. But then I was like, if I make myself do it, if I just make it routine so that I have to do it before my week is over, right? Like, Friday is not Friday until I've submitted my couple of articles. And so that's what, and I didn't, and the reason I thought like that is because I didn't have a way to get this information other than doing that. And then I thought, okay, I'm just being lazy by saying, like, I'd rather do something else. What am I going to be doing in the interim anyway? So working my way through business school, studying finance and data analytics, and was in some pretty esoteric finance classes, figured out a way, and I think this is really important as we think about, just how to pivot and kind of think about things holistically, how to force multiply what I was doing. Because I was in school and I was also writing about Bitcoin, which, by the way, in 2014, there wasn't Ethereum. Ethereum happened in 2015. And so I started, but I was like, wow, I am doing tons of analytics projects. And guess what? There are tons of numbers that sprout up from around the Bitcoin ecosystem. So what I would do is I would use all of these, any trading data that was available, or any utilization data that was available, or whatever, and I would do projects on the articles that I was writing to help me out in B school as well, right, in that study of finance. And so anyway, by force multiplying, was able to kind of kill two birds with one stone, and more in some cases. And then it dawned on me that, yep, okay, I talked to my wife, came to business school, said I was gonna move into higher finance. And so I had done well in school. I treated it like a job, and had done all right. And so actually started kind of going down this path of being applying for gigs, being recruited in some cases, and I was applying to banks. I mean, flat out, like I was applying to the best banks that I could think of, and I seemed to be getting a pretty good reaction. And I started thinking about it, and I was like, okay, what is the blockchain scene? Let me drill in. What's the blockchain scene in LA? And this happened, I thought about this early on in B school, but then, it came up like, probably early 2015. And so I asked my editor to allow me to do coverage of the blockchain, the LA scene, the blockchain LA scene. And so with a press pass, you can get into a bunch of things, by the way. And so, I'd done some interviews on some local companies, and I had been able to kind of get in and be like the blockchain guy for, these money conferences around town. And, because I got my editor to give me a press badge, and the press badge is legit. It's from a press group. And so Jim, GEM, and a company by the name of Netkey were the two in Los Angeles at the time, the sizable ones. And so I made it kind of a habit to continue to keep up with what they were doing, but I never really put the pieces together. I wasn't like, this is something that I can do for a living. And so as I'm sitting there and going through this whole banking process, and it's becoming very real that I've studied hard in school, what am I going to do with this? I just started thinking about it, and I'm like, man, this is maybe some of the most exciting technology that I I've ever heard of in my lifetime, certainly, and maybe that many people have heard of in their lifetime. Certainly, and that's not unique. I mean, I think many people that are listening to this, you probably feel this way. I mean, blockchain and cryptocurrencies are going to do. Um, they are going to do a lot of really special things at scale and I believe this, for human beings at scale. I really do believe this. That this is where a lot of the productivity that we need to move forward into some very interesting places is gonna need to come from. That aside, I'm sitting there and I'm interviewing with these banks and I'm thinking, like, this is that moment, right? This is that moment where it's like, that you're faced with a decision. This is a fork in the road, and it demands that you pick a path, right? And so I took a step back and I talked to all of my mentors. I talked to, all of these people, my friends, my wife, my parents, and I wanted generically, like, this seems pivotal. Let me explain to you at a high level. Does it sound pivotal? And I felt it was, and some people said yes, some people said no, but I kind of looked in the mirror and I said, okay, like I'm going to go for it. And so I ended up taking a chance, and I took my resume and I rode my motorcycle over to I tried to get in touch with Jim and Madeline for months. LinkedIn, nobody would answer. Would call, nobody would pick up the phone. And I don't think I ever did this with Jim, but as kind of a last big ripcord, every now and again I'll send a handwritten letter. If I have no other way to get in touch, I will absolutely sit down and write on a piece of paper to try to get in touch with somebody. And so I don't think I did that for Jim, but
it works. Not to cut you off, but like, it's amazing in today's world, right? Everybody's used to like everything happening here, and if like when you get a piece of mail, I actually noticed this because I have I have my bachelor party coming up, and my best man saved the dates to everybody, and the content is questionable, but I see this letter with somebody's handwriting on it, which doesn't look like a bill. It doesn't look like, and that pops out to you, right? And so I open 100% of those, whereas some of the other stuff I take a look at it and it gets tossed. So I like that as like a last resort. Can't get, and you always. That's the beauty. I've done this a couple times where if you know somebody's business, you get their business address, just write their name and the business address and fire it off, and chances are it'll find its way to the right person.
It will absolutely find its way to them, and if you do a creative job in picking the envelope size and color, you can also help it stand out a little bit more, right?
For sure.
And so don't send a white envelope, send a colored envelope, and take your penmanship seriously, and don't write it on college ruled note paper. But yeah, be thoughtful about it. But of course, yeah. I mean, you get something like that in the mail, I'd be delighted. Are you kidding?
100%.
Yeah. And so I got their business address, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to ask for an interview in person. And so I thought about what I was going to say. I chose the time and date very carefully. I thought, I'm going to go on a Friday where everybody's happy and it's the end of the week, and I'm going to go at like 3:30. So it's like, I know people will be there, but they're probably getting ready to leave. And so I'm like, at very least, and I wasn't going to camp out and be weird and like hang out outside. But I thought, at very least, I'll stick my resume in the door, right? At very least. And at very most, somebody will pick the door up. And I thought, if they have a mail slot, and I brought an envelope, I was like, I'll slide it through the mail slot, right? With a note, of course. And so knocked on the door, and lo and behold, which that's my Southern upbringing probably coming through there, but Micah Winklespec, the CEO of this company, was picking the mail up through their mail slot and answered the door. And I'm like thinking, well, this is unexpected. So I'm like, so you don't know me, but I know you and your company really well. I actually do coverage here locally. I write about businesses like yours. And I was like, I will push a broom to work here. And I thought about what I was going to say, and I'm like, you don't want to be tacky, but I wanted to, in very short order, get the point across that I'll give you time. Like that's the thing I have to give, and I'll give it to you, right? And he said, well, I don't know that we need the floor swept, but he said, I'll take your resume. And I said, okay, great. How can I follow up? I just want to make sure that it's read. How can I follow up? And he
Love
actually
that.
gave me Madeline's information.
Nice.
So I got home and I sent Madeline an email, and I just said I just dropped my resume off. Wanted to confirm that you got it. I really appreciate the consideration and even taking the time to read it. And if there's anything that I can possibly answer, let me know. And at the time I was doing a turn at a private equity group, which I hated private equity. But I knew that it was analytically very rigorous, and that I would be able to leverage that into something else. So I just continued to do it. And so I said, if I would love 5-10 minutes of your time, and if what I say is interesting, I'd love more of your time. And so that's kind of how that started.
Awesome. No, that's one of my favorite stories, because you went from, a lot of people, I tell people, reach out, get in touch with people, fire off emails, whatever. But then what happens when that doesn't work? You kind of got to find another creative way. So I love that you showed up there. I love that the CEO was the guy who answered the door. That's so serendipitous. It's
Yeah.
awesome. But so you ended up working for these guys. What were you doing at Gem?
Well, there's an important step before that, right?
Okay.
And I'll be brief, but this is why doing the legwork is so important, because I showed up and I knew what I was talking about,
Yep.
and I could actually describe the technology, understand its usefulness, and I used to think about different ways to use it. And so one of my assignments in my interview process, Emily Vaughn, who now runs, I think she's like the director of blockchain projects at Change Healthcare.
Okay.
She was my colleague at the time. Well, she actually hired me, and then we became colleagues. But she was like, I need you to write me an essay on blockchains beyond finance. And this was just as Ethereum was coming out. And I knew it. I knew the space, and I knew I had already kind of built out in my head different use cases. And so I was like, great, how many words you want? 500, 5,000, 10,000? Let me know, right? And so anyway, my point is doing the homework is incredibly important, and studying is incredibly important, because when that moment happens, you get one shot.
Yep.
And if you have not done it, that one shot quickly goes away, and what could have been this amazing journey, because you tried to cut corners at some point, didn't pan out. And so Emily gave me some good critical feedback on my essay. I didn't get it all right, but I got a lot of it right. And I came in as an intern, and I said, you know what? I am a graduate student. I'm at a pretty good school. I told you I'd sweep the floors. I will. And so I was an intern, and I just said, I'm going to come in, I'm going to be an intern, but I'm also going to build out in my spare time business use cases. I want to pitch you on those, because at the end of this, I want to work here, and I'm going to prove to you that I want to work here. And so that's what I did. And so at the end of it, I talked to Micah, and I said, I know that Jim was a small shop, but we kind of carved out healthcare as our main beachhead. And I said, healthcare is interesting. I'll help any way that I can, but I'd like to run my own little skunkworks group as well. And so Micah, amazing CEO, great guy, and said, come work here and work on healthcare, because that's how we how we pay the bills. But if you'd like to work on some of this other stuff, I'll give you that leeway. And so that's what I ended up doing at Gym. I was kind of a hybrid, I guess I don't want to overstate it, business development, squarely business development, but we were tasked with being more technical salespeople. And so my job was to go and understand data flows and kind of map that over and explain through through a couple of different filters to our insanely talented engineers exactly what the customer's looking for. And so through that path ended up being able to present to the World Bank. We presented to a couple of times to some interesting agencies in DC. I ended up, through cold calling and through kind of this funky process of trying to think about ways to engage a wide variety of people, ended up bringing Toyota on as a customer. Got to work in the oil and gas data flows and stuff like that. So very, very interesting term.
Awesome. Awesome. No, I love it. It's so cool that you also just like went for the internship because you knew this was, I mean, you made the decision, right? You had the two, you had A or B, traditional finance, blockchain. You made the decision, you stuck with it, fully invested. But then you also asked for more, right? You're like, okay, I will do this. I will sleep the floors, but I'm going to do it if you allow me to also get involved in these other things that I want to do. And I think that's critical, especially at any company, big or small. I've seen it at the startups that I work at. I've seen it at Microsoft too. If you can carve out, if you're known as the person who is always working on that stretch project, coming up with new ideas, etc., that's one of the most valuable things that you can bring to the table. And that can lead to a full-time job. It can lead to a promotion. It can lead to a whole lot of good things. So I love that. And I mean, it's very in line with everything else that we've talked about tonight on your side. Yep. So that's how you got into blockchain. That's kind of where you cut your teeth at an actual company. And then you moved to Neural, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit more about Neural. Tell us about that transition.
So was working for Jim, loved working for Jim, but I had invested a lot of time and money in studying finance. Mm-hmm. And so the token marketplace really started to emerge as something of size in 2016. So I started in 14, ended up at Jim in 2015, 16, I think. And then the token marketplace like really started kind of being built in 2016. 2017 was just like crazy last year, right?
Yep.
Just totally crazy. And so met the guys at Neural a few years prior, and just really liked Chris and Ari. Super smart guys, thinking about things in a really interesting way. We had talked on a couple of occasions about potentially working together. The timing wasn't right for me. We had a lot of irons in the fire at Jim. Micah and Madeline and everyone at Jim was just an amazing company. And they were so good to me, and I wanted to just make sure that I really delivered value for these guys, and so I said, okay, I've got a couple of big clients that I want to close, and when those are closed and when those are up and running, then I'll have the conversation about looking beyond. Because I mean, it's you can't just stair step. You have to make sure you deliver value, and when you say I'm going to be an intern, I'll sweep the floors, they're taking a chance on you. Mm-hmm. And you must deliver. Like that is, you cannot just get some credits and then the people that take care of you must take care of them. And you must go above and beyond to make sure that you are and when I say, I'm going to say legacy, and I'm not saying legacy as in your name is on some plaque. Simply it is, when there were hard things to be done, you raised your hand and you did it. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of the path that you are proud of. You're proud of your trajectory. No matter how crazy it is, you've always worked hard and you've delivered value. And so closed a couple of key accounts for them, and was in a position, we were doing some fundraising and felt like, well, once that fundraising round was done and these clients were kind of set in motion, I could look on. And so this was, September of 2017. Had been in touch with Chris and Ari. They asked me if I would like to come on and take a full-time position at Neural. Neural was one of the first crypto hedge funds. They actually started in 2016, which was pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And then had kind of gotten up and running. They were in the Bay. And I said, yeah, that sounds really interesting. And so ended up asking 100%. I mean, I had made my mind up, but I said, Micah, I feel like I need to do this. And, I want to be, as appropriate professional as I possibly can. And I did get his blessing to move on because I think that that's important. He took a chance on me, and I wanted to make sure that he had gotten the value that I had promised. Mm-hmm. And so ended up migrating up to the Bay in September and leading investor relations, and also helping to build an analyst desk for these guys, which was kind of really that side of the space that I really wanted to work on. But they needed an IR guy too, and I had a sales background. And so, ended up going to work for Neural for about 7-8 months. and built an excellent token project called Apex Token Fund up there. Was able to source some of the folks, that I'd worked with in the past because we had a great relationship, and I had, been the guy that was, willing to do the things that sometimes they didn't want to do when it came, to those late nights.
Yep.
And they picked the phone up and was able to recruit some of them for a couple of cool projects. And then January rolled around and this opportunity came up, and I talked to Chris and Ari and felt like it was an appropriate move at that time. And now I'm sitting here talking to you, man.
Awesome. And that's one thing I want to touch on real quick to close things out. You went from, I love that you went from intern to full-time to founder in like such a short span, but you're at this full-time job at the hedge fund. And I know that you started kind of working on this idea and building your project now as a side hustle. So tell us a little bit about how, once you had the idea, how did you find the time to work on it? What did that look like? And then also, when did you know, like, okay, now is the time for me to take this on full time?
Sure. So I think that this will be I've had a couple of side hustles that I didn't address in this, but I think having a side hustle, no matter what, and I'm saying even if it is an eBay store, even if it is you're flipping antiques and making an extra $50, getting your mind used to parallel processing and like thinking in that way, and having things that remind you that we live in a world of infinite possibility. That does not mean you're always going to win at all, but
usually doesn't. Yeah.
It usually doesn't, but you can try anything.
Yep.
And that is true. And so, and as long as you're willing to, like, if when you start something, if you're not willing to travel that path and step back and say, I didn't win, but I'm better for it, then don't start it. Right. And so getting your mind used to thinking like that's really important. And so my reason in saying this is that this was probably the fourth project that I've done on the side. And so what I typically do is you know what your job is, and you know what it's going to take to continue to succeed. And that's important, to continue to succeed at your job, because if you were working for somebody else, I don't care how corporate it is or how much you don't like it or how much you feel like you're being undervalued or whatever, if you have decided that you really want to have a meaningful side hustle, and this might turn into something that you want to do, you still need to deliver value for who you're working for. I mean, that is important. Like using company resources and company time, no, you don't need to do that, because 24 hours is an insanely massive amount of time if you'll schedule it properly, right? Yep. And so what I always do is I say, if I get up an hour earlier or I stay up an hour later, right, what does that look like? And then I say, okay, what do I have to do, right? I have to eat, I have to sleep, I have to get exercise, I have to go to work. There are things that you must do in your life, right? But if you become highly regimented when you decide to bring in this side hustle, you can actually get pretty good at scheduling. And I'm a guy that's not good at scheduling at all. As a matter of fact, I hate scheduling. But you showed this a while back. This is an amazing tool if you'll use it.
Yep.
And so just really building a schedule that is rigorous and saying, I mean, can you imagine if you take Saturday and Sunday, right? And you don't even work a full-time day. You work a half day on Saturday and Sunday, working towards your goal, working towards your side hustle. The amount of things that you can get accomplished, in so long as you're really working, you're not watching YouTube, but you're actually, checking boxes.
Yep.
And so that's what I did. I think about ways that I can expand my day. I think about the things that I don't have to do to be a healthy person. You don't need to watch Netflix every night. You don't need to watch, Netflix every weekend. Yep. And then I think about I make lists incessantly, keeping lists to make sure that I'm holding myself accountable. And then also setting little milestones and say, like, in a week, like, if this is where I want to be, what does this look like? Yep. What does this look like? What does this look like? What does this look like? And then just building your plan around that, and just saying, if my first step is discovery, what do I need to see out of this project to say, this is interesting, maybe I'm going to take it to the next level. And then if my second step is like, maybe I want to do this full time, what pros and cons, what do you need to see to say like this is something that I can do, right? And so then I think as you develop an idea and you're headed down that pathway, and you're being a brutalist with yourself, brutally realistic, because you have to remember nobody's baby's ugly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So surrounding yourself with people uh, that are being brutally honest with you and demand it. I'm telling you, that pedicab business, funny enough, resurfaced in a completely different form, and I'm now running that with another partner, a completely different business, Link Box, right? But it's the same thing. It's just highly scalable, and it's like but you have to. We went to a conference. The reason I'm telling this story is we went to a conference, and we've done the same thing with Omni, and we said, tell me why this is stupid. Tell me why this won't work. Like, rip it up, because you're not going to succeed with people just nodding and saying, I like you and this is a great idea, or I don't really want to hurt his feelings. Demand, brutality, if you will, for lack of a better term,
Yeah, yeah.
from the people that are reviewing it, and be ready. Swallow your pride, forget your ego, check it, and just be ready to hear things that you don't like, because they will make you better. 100%. It will make your project better. It will make you a better communicator when you can hear hard things that aren't what you want to hear and still kind of figure out a path forward. Or, by the way, which this is startup life, maybe it's not right.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you missed a big thing, and all of a sudden this idea that you've had 6 weeks plowed into already exists in total form.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's happened, what did you take out of it? You learned how to research. You learned how to schedule. You learned how to divide and divide your days and conquer in that. And those are skill sets. You learned how to study. You learned how to cold call people. And those are skill sets that you can map over to anything else that you do. And if you rinse, wash, and repeat, and you are committed to the rigor, we're not all going to be Elon Musk. But that's not the point, man. The point is traveling the path,
Yeah. Yeah, and we all have our own path, right?
That's right.
But I think that a lot of people feel like one of the things that I am kind of passionate about, and it's ironic, I guess, that I use the word, is people always wait. Passion has become this thing, right? People wait for a lightning bolt to hit them in the middle of the night, and they wake up and they're like, this is what I've been passionate about. But in my opinion, and you can tell me yours, but passion comes from doing the work first. It's hard to understand what you're passionate about unless you get your hands dirty and you see what's awesome about it and what sucks about it and everything in between. And then you can decide this is for me and this is not for me. And both of those are equally important. Understanding what you don't want to do, what you don't like, is just as important as understanding some of the things that you do. But yeah, I think you got to start doing the work first. Once you start doing the work, you start to understand what you like. You get involved in these different projects, and it also teaches you, like you said, if you are used to having an idea, saying, okay, how can I get involved? And then going and reading, talking to people, doing X, Y, Z, that may seem arduous the first time you do it, the second time you do it. But once you've done it 5 times, it's, second nature at that point. And that's when you really start rolling and these ideas start flowing. And that's when you start truly living the path, right? With all its ups and downs and, the highs and lows. So I love it. And Joseph, thank you so much for stopping by, man. This has been fantastic. The amount of knowledge you've dropped is insane. So I really appreciate it.
Yep. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Austin. I really appreciate it too, man. And I'm telling you, this is a big, crazy, beautiful world out there. And, we don't get a lot of time here, man. And so on that short timeline, like, how are you spending it? Like, get up each day and just attack it. 'Cause like anything that you want's out there, but you've got to knock on the doors and you've got to put the legwork in. And, I think, once you build that discipline, it is a beautiful, beautiful life. And it's fun. That's the most important part, right?
Hell yeah. So. Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Joseph. We'll talk to you soon, man. Take care.
All right. You bet. See ya.